In this video we're going to look at fixing a design that probably has more than one fault, but we're going to cover one of the major ones that somebody had asked me to kind of look at, and I think we can actually, after looking at it a couple times here, I think we can actually fix it pretty easily. Then we'll look at a couple of the other things that I see wrong with the design, and if we have a chance here we'll take a look at those. If you look at this design, I mean, most people looking at it right offhand here, we'll put in 3D mode there, doesn't look too bad. And we're going to concentrate on the filled area of these, I guess they're pajamas maybe we'll call them. The filled area here really looks like it would probably work okay at first glance, but actually when it's stitched, and I'm going to show you a picture here, we're getting this problem right here, which just looks like some missing stitches. That's it. It just looks like this fill and this fill, there's just a gap between them, and there's not actually a gap there. This is what I call a pinch situation, and it all comes from the design being digitized incorrectly. And when I say incorrectly, I think at this point I'm probably not going to offend anybody, because I have a feeling this design was not digitized by a person, but is the result of some sort of automated digitizing. And I say that mostly because of, you can see these little opened areas here were left open where the outline goes around, and if somebody was digitizing this by hand, or actually plotting the points to make this design, you wouldn't go around those. They only cause problems, but automated software a lot of times leaves those kind of areas open and actually causes a lot of problems. So the problem here being is this design stitches this fill in this direction. Hopefully you can see my cursor here. It stitches in this direction, comes down here to the bottom, and works its way up. And both, what happens here is, as this fill moves this way, it pushes a small amount of material ahead of it, of your fabric. Doesn't matter how you stabilize it or anything. You might get a little bit, and then coming back this way, we've now pushed material this way, and we end up with a little ridge here that will sometimes push out from the fill or just leave a little gap. And the other problem with this is this is not, there's no underlay under any of this filled stitches here. So I'll highlight this area right here. You can see that's what we've got to fix, and I believe it's coming from the fabric being pinched as it's pushed this way and pushed up this way. Right in the middle you get a little pinch of fabric that sticks out. So just to go back to our design, we're going to do a slow redraw here, and you'll see exactly what I mean. We'll get a few of that. There's our first fill that moves from right to left, does a couple pieces of it. Right there is our first area of fabric. Right along here, this all been pushed this way. If it would have been done correctly, or that the machine would have done it correctly, the software that did it, we could have pushed it all the way over here. That fabric would have probably not created a problem, because you wouldn't have this pinch. Because what's going to happen here is we're going to come back over here, see where it comes up through here, and what's going to happen, that fabric has nowhere to go now that's going ahead of that leading edge of the stitching, and it's just going to pinch it right into that other stitching that's already there. There's just nowhere for it to go. Now we're going to fix it. I think we can just fix it with some underlay, but that won't be as easy as you might think. We're going to go ahead and I'll go ahead and take that out. See these little areas right in here? If a person would have digitized this, you would have brought that fill right up through there, and that would have been solid. I mean, in most cases, that's the way I think of it. I wouldn't even think of leaving those little areas open. It's actually cost you more stitches, and it just causes you definitely more problems. And if you will look at the way this is stitched, you can see how this kind of jumps all over the place. I hope a machine done that, because that outline could be done without any trims, without anything like that. That could all be done in one complete motion without having to stop and trim and go to pick up little pieces and stuff like that. So we're going to blame it on a machine and go from there. This red stitching in here, we're not going to cover this. This is definitely, I think, going to be a problem. And if somebody wants help with that too, I'll try to come up with a solution for it. But what we're going to do is, the first thing we're going to do is add underlay under this. And that may seem real easy, but it's actually not as easy as just hitting the underlay function and turning it on. The reason for that being is that the way this is brought into Floriani, this is not really Floriani software fault, but just the way it converts this back into, as you can see, it doesn't convert this into one big complex fill. It converts it into a lot of small pieces, and the worst part is it doesn't convert it into even small complex fills. It converts it into what it calls satin stitches with the tatami specification, making it look like a fill. And the reason that causes this problem is that does not allow us to add the kind of underlay we want. We can go up here and change the underlay, but we really can't change it on a satin stitch, or not satin, yeah, satin stitch to some sort of lattice work or anything. The best we're going to get is maybe a perpendicular stitch down the middle, or you're going to get a contour stitch around the outside. You're never going to get something to go across there anyway that I've seen. And I think my solution probably is a little quicker anyway than going through all these and resetting the underlay. What we're going to do, and maybe it seems complicated depending on your level of use of the software, and I'll point out one other thing. I am using Floriani Digitizing Pro 3. This is not the high-end package, but it will do what I consider everything needed to digitize a design. The high-end packages cost 3, 4, 5 times as much money, have a lot more bells and whistles, but if you're doing it by hand anyway, you can spend the $600 I think for this piece of software, and you can create, every design is, you can create anything anyway because it has all the digitizing functions, the basic functions that you need to create all the different types of stitches. Again, not all the bells and whistles, maybe some of the automated stuff that you may want to use isn't in that, but what I'm going to show you works from the Digitizing Pro 3 version all the way up to the Total Control Professional, whatever all those are. So what we're going to do is we're just going to create an underlay underneath all of this blue filled area. Now I'm not going to do it all manually, which I could do, but we're going to cover how we're going to get that in there. Now what we need to remember when we digitize something, as far as I know, every time you start digitizing or you start adding something, it always adds it to the end of the design. So we're just going to let it add it to the end of the design, and then we're going to move it to, actually in this case we're going to move it to the beginning of the design because it has to run before everything else. So to add it to the end here, I'm going to make it a separate color. I'm going to come down here. As you can see, we have 4 colors. I'm going to click, actually I have to right click on that next square where the 5 would be, and I say add a color. And it randomly picks one, and if you click on it you can change it, but we're going to go ahead and we'll make it orange. I think it'll stand out better as we do it. And then once I get the color set, I'm going to right click on it, and that will, you can see that square is highlighted there. That means when I start making my stitches here, it's actually going to do it in that color. So the first thing we're going to do is we're just going to grab our run tool, and we're going to leave this on as a reference of where we're going to go. I think that's probably the best way to go. And I'm just going to start right here in the middle because we're going to move this to the very beginning, and so we might as well start as close to the middle as we can. Not important how close we are though, because it'll work out fine. This design's solid. It's not going to leave any stitches uncovered by anything. And the first thing I'm going to do is just with our run tool, I'm just going to make a quick trip around this whole design, and this will just allow us to, I always like to have a design that kind of traces around the whole thing if we can to start with. That way before we get completely started, we're going to know if this thing's fitting in the hoop, we're going to know if it's fitting into the shape or whatever that we want. So if you start a design with something like this and you go around the outside first, it gives you a chance for your machine to get sewing. Make sure it's picked up that bobbin thread. and is ready to go. So we've made one trip around the outside. I'm going to go ahead and right click. That'll make that one thing there. And in my haste here, I have cut a couple corners kind of close here. So I'm just going to edit those points. As you can see, I was almost cutting outside the design there just because I'm talking and digitizing at the same time. That's my excuse anyway. Okay, so we've got the running stitch just around the outside. From here, I'm going to go ahead and switch over to my complex fill tool. And we're kind of going to do the same thing again. We're going to, right here's where we stop, so we're going to start right there. And you don't have to get clear to the outside because this is just going to be underlay is all we're going to do here. So we don't have to be super exact. We're just going to go around this outside, and I'm going to stay on the inside of that black outline. And just work our way around the design, because what this will serve is not to replace the fill that's there, which would be another option. I mean, there's always tons of ways to fix this, and my first way would have been just redo it because there's so many things about this design I don't like. But if I was to do that, it probably would never get done, but this is actually going to be pretty easy. So complex fill tool, we're going to work our way all the way around it. And if I remember right, when we get to here, if I hit the H key, I will then, which stands for hole, I believe, I'm going to go in here and I'm going to define this hole because I don't want my underlay going underneath that car. Probably wouldn't be a big disaster, but we've learned how to do a hole. Okay, once I get all the way around the hole, then I'm done. If I had another hole, I guess I just hit H again and define another hole. But I can just right click, and you can see it defined a filled area right where I plotted my lines, and then it, where I hit the hole and plotted that, it left a hole in the fill. So we've got exactly what we want right there. We've got a fill stitch covering that, and what we're going to do is turn that into underlay underneath that fill to hold all that fabric in place, so that when our pinch is actually formed, our fabric can't move as much. This isn't 100% fixed, but I bet you it'll work in this case. Now the next thing we need to determine here is, we're going to resequence this in a minute, but we're going to have to set density on this fill. We don't want it to be solid like this. It's just going to make too many stitches when we put another one over top. The other thing we have to do is we want to make sure that our underlay should always go perpendicular to your fill stitch. And if you fail geometry, perpendicular means at a 90-degree angle. So we want it to basically go at a 90-degree angle to our fill. Our fill was moving, it's not straight up and down, but it's closer to straight up and down. So we need to get our fill, our underlay fill here, going in a direction, let's see, I can use the ruler tool, a direction about like this, because our fill was going like this. So we want those to meet at a 90-degree angle. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to select that fill, click on our, I believe they call that the shape tool, and right here this yellow line is our direction of fill, and we're going to move it up here like this. And that will give us, if I right click, then it's moving along that yellow line, and that will be 90 degrees, approximately 90 degrees to the fill, which is moving, get the ruler tool again, it's moving this way. So as you can see, where those two cross, it forms 90 degrees, and that's what we want for underlay. The next thing we want to do is, we don't want full density like that. I'm just going to guess that, you know, I'm going to do like 1.5. That would be, the stitches in there will be 1.5 millimeters apart. That's kind of hard to see because it's on top. Let's just turn these colors off so we can just see what we're working on here. That there. That's probably pretty heavy underlay, but that's probably fairly close to what we might need. And actually there's underlay under this underlay, so we could actually probably turn that off. See, we have perpendicular on, now we just have the stitches of the fill, which is forming our underlay, so we don't really need double underlay. Possibly higher. As you can see, as we go higher, we have fewer stitches. The space between these rows is now 1.9 millimeters, or closer to 2 millimeters. So that's how density affects your fill. The next thing that this is not a big deal, but I'm going to show you this because this is considered the correct technique for doing underlay, and I got to find where you change this. With this highlighted, you can see this is the correct way a fill is done. The way these, I think they call this chiseled, but for underlay it's supposed to be more like this one here. If you can see which one I'm pointing to, that one is a square edge, and we can change that somewhere in here, right here under general, and we can change that to square. And when we hit apply, watch this edge. Oh, I didn't want to move that. Okay, I undid that. So watch this edge right here as I change this to square. You can see this actually forms a better line. That is actually considered the correct way for underlay to go, is to have that. If you were doing it manually, you would plot a stitch over, plot a stitch up, plot a stitch back, up, back, up. You just wouldn't go back and forth, back and forth. Technically, that's the way it's supposed to be done. How much difference it makes, not sure. This will make a little bit cleaner edge, so from what I have always learned, that is the correct way. So we're just going to make that little change. That's from chiseled edge to square edge, and it's under general in your properties menu. Okay, we've got these other colors turned off, and I'm going to turn them back on before we start moving this. So all we need to do is, this needs to run before everything else, is I'm just going to click on this fifth color here. It says color 5, but it's also the fifth one down, and I will drag it up, clicking and holding, and I will drop it up here above the first one, and that should, when I drop it, it'll make it the first color, and I'll collapse that. As you can see, it's the first color, and now our blue is the second color. Don't look at these color numbers. That's actually a thread number. We're looking at the order of this. The orange will run first, the blue will run second. And then to show that and show how this is going to fix the problem, we're going to do the slow redraw again. We're going to bring slowly, see that underlay go down, and looky there, that even our underlay is creating a pinch, but actually I can fix that, and I'll show you how to fix that. If this is a perfect learning situation, because if that other fill, the blue here that was going to run next, see, our blue is not changed, but what's happening is our fabric is held in place by that underlay, and we should not push nearly as much fabric ahead of that fill. And here comes our big pinch right here. When it comes up through there, there won't be near as much fabric pushing ahead of that fill because of it's been tacked down. Now the reason we can't resequence this fill, I shouldn't say it's not impossible, but it would be a nightmare because it's in so many little pieces, because this was converted from stitches back to an outline. So let's go back to removing the pinch from our underlay, and since it's a complex fill, it actually should be pretty easy. I'm going to turn off all our other colors here, so we have just this, and we're going to click on it, and we'll get our shape tool. And the reason we have a pinch is because our start and end point here are actually on opposite sides of the fill, which they need to be, but they need to be on opposite sides of the fill in the direction the fill actually moves. So the easiest way to fix it is since our fill goes left to right, it seems like you'd want your start and stop there. No, you actually want it to the opposite ends. So we're going to move our start down to here. We'll move our stop up to the top, and this will eliminate most of the pinch. I mean, there's always going to be certain areas you could go crazy trying to eliminate every area, but let's look at just this with a slow redraw, and just by moving that start and stop, you can see, looky there, we're moving from bottom, and as it goes up, it may pick up little areas along the way, but look at that, see, it comes up there, and we've now moved from the bottom all the way to the top, and we haven't had major areas where the fabric is pinched. We had a small one right here. not going to be a big deal. But let's go back over that. Back to here, click on it, shape tool. We're starting there at our green dot. We just moved our red one up there. We'll just do it one more time here. It'll start at the bottom. After our running stitch, it'll start at the bottom, work our way up, and eliminate pinching on in the middle where you've got a really wide area. So that's actually probably going to work out real well. Turn back on all of our colors and do another quick slow redraw. Going to put the fill down. Then we're going to go back to this, to our fill that we really don't have much control over, so we can't change. And with that underlay under there, that should really hold it in place and should eliminate that pinch. One other quick thing we could do, get our shape tool and find those fills where they pinch, and we could move the points so they overlap a little bit. I don't think we're going to have to do that, but that would be our next solution to it. So that would probably, you could overlap this one into this one, or this one into that one, or do both, so that overlap would fill in that gap. I don't think you'd have to in this case. I think it's going to work out fine. I think the next problem with this design, I'll turn the 3D off and I'll zoom in here, is this outline is probably not going to line up real well because there's not much overlap in there. And there's a couple ways you could solve that. You could move all the points of the fill inside there. You could thicken the outline, or what I would probably recommend trying is, in fact, we could do that, show you how to do that. It'd be real easy. And the other thing I guess I thought we should maybe do is put these two colors together now that I always like to keep them separate until we get it moved where you want. I think if we can put this, merge these two colors together, because we're not going to want to sew two. I think if we just change this to a color 1, we should just now have one color. I'll do a quick slow redraw. I got ADD here, I got distracted. As you can see now, we've eliminated that, the color that we digitized, we put it into the first color. So hopefully you can replay that if you, because I did that kind of fast. Adding some overlap. This would be a matter of trial and error. I would select that whole first color, go up here to push pull, and because of the type of stitch this is, I would do absolute only on the pull here. We're not going to mess with the push because the push is actually going to work in our favor. But you'll have to trust me on that, because I don't have time in a video to explain that, but I've got an idea how to explain that someday. 0.3 millimeters I'm going to try. We didn't take a close look at this before. This could cause problem. This could put that fill outside the outline, so you have to be careful. But we've got good overlap now just by that 0.3 millimeters. Everywhere where there was pull, it's compensated for that. And I don't see any areas where the fill is now sticking out of the outline, which would be very unlikely. And the way I would fix that is I would just go down here, I'd select the black, which is the outline, and I'd say, since that's a column stitch, this time I'm going to say percentage, because the column stitch is pretty much the same width all the way around. We couldn't say that for our satin stitches that were, some of them were really wide, some of them were really narrow, so we can't really do a percentage. So I'm going to do percentage this time, and I'm going to say, I'm going to go ridiculous. I'm going to do 125%, because I think we're going to be able to actually see that on the screen. Apply that. Now notice how much thicker that black outline is. Thicker means you got more room for error, and it will catch those edges much better. So boom, look how quick we just added some thickness to that whole outline, and I think that will probably stitch out better. Okay, video's getting kind of long. Hopefully this fixes this design. I'm going to send it off to the lady that sent it to me, and she can sew it and tell me that it didn't work. And oh no, it's going to work perfect. That's right. So hopefully you guys learned something on that. We went over a lot of things kind of quickly, but that's the great thing about a video. Just keep playing it over and over. And the next thing I can guarantee you that I wouldn't like on this is the car. And I'd probably just replace that red fill with a complex fill. So there's a challenge for anybody that wants to Well, you don't have the file, you can't do that. Okay, the challenge for the lady that sent me this is to replace that red with a complex fill, just like I replaced that complex fill underneath to add that underlay. So there's a challenge. If not, maybe in another video I'll do that. So hopefully everybody learned something, and we'll see you in the next video.